I taught myself to cook. Over 20 years of obsessively experimenting in the kitchen and questioning everything to create my magical restaurant dishes. Now I'm going to share my secrets with you so you can cook like me at home. Looks brilliant, doesn't it? Each week we'll look at one key ingredient like chocolate, cheese or eggs. This week it's beef. I really believe that by getting to grips with your ingredients, you'll gain the confidence to be more creative with your cooking. I like that. I'm going to go back to basics, challenge traditional techniques, and compile a compendium of tips to transform how you cook at home. I'm taking 5 from that one. So come and share my innermost secrets. Beef. I love it because it's the meat with the most potential for magical transformations in the kitchen. This week I'll be challenging basic beef techniques from how to cook a perfect steak every time. Just the most delicious, tender steak you can imagine. To burgers that are tender and tasty.
Bloody good burger.
Then on to some magic that you can do at home. A trick to make a fabulous oxtail pudding. It is a beautiful thing. And some real theatre with a flaming chili con carne.
It's absolutely fantastic.
Oh, and you'll need a syringe, a blowtorch and some wood chips from the garden. After all this, you'll never cook or look at beef the same way again. For me, a great steak should be juicy, tender and packed full of flavour. What most people do is go and buy a steak from a supermarket, get it out of the packet straight from the fridge, into a pan, medium heat, cook it and then eat it immediately. Well, that is all wrong. First, choose the right cut of steak. Go for a steak that's thick enough so it doesn't dry out in the pan and it's got really nice fat marbling. Marbling will help it stay juicy, so choose a cut like sirloin or this one, ribeye. The first thing you want to do is take it out of the packet. Just put it on a cake rack, set over a tray and leave it in the fridge for 2 days. The air will circulate around the steak and it'll start to dry it out, which will concentrate the flavour and start to tenderize the meat. Another mistake people make is to cook the steak straight from the fridge, but by the time you've got the centre to the right temperature, the outside's going to be overcooked. So leave them for a couple of hours to come to room temperature. Now it's ready to cook. For me, the perfect steak has a delicious dark crust on the outside and a soft, juicy inside. And I found a really easy way to achieve just that. Now, most recipes say you put the steak in a medium pan and leave it there for 2 to 4 minutes, turning once. But this is not the way to get the best results. What I do is start with a really hot pan, and I mean smoking hot. Now, I know a lot of you are going to be looking at that thinking, I'm too scared, I'm going to burn my kitchen down. You're not going to burn your kitchen down. Should I say that? What happens if somebody does burn their kitchen down? Next, season your steak with table salt, but not pepper. This pan is so hot the pepper would scorch. Save that to the end. Lay the steak in the pan away from you. Just look at that hot oil jumping out. The intense heat will give you that brown crust by causing an amazing thing called the Maillard reaction, in which proteins and sugars react to create delicious meaty flavours. So here's my secret for the perfect steak. I'm flipping this steak every 15 to 20 seconds. As you can see on the thermal imaging camera, the side away from the heat cools down really quickly. My flipping trick means that the outsides stay hot enough for a crust to form, but the insides won't overcook. Now, how do you tell when your steak is done? Don't cut into your steak to test if it's ready. You'll only let all the juices run out. Get a digital thermometer and push it into the middle. If you want rare, take it out at 45 degrees, medium 55, and well done out at 65 degrees centigrade. Next, very important stage is to let the meat rest. Now, I know the steak looks good enough to eat, but the residual heat's going to raise the temperature by at least 5 degrees, so don't worry, it won't get cold. Rest it for at least 5 minutes. While my steak is having a snooze, I'm going to demonstrate why resting meat is so important with the help of my development chef, Otto, the human press. Now, believe it or not, 75% of this is water. It's really important to keep as much of this moisture in the meat as possible after cooking. That's what's going to make it juicy, and that's what resting does. Otto's cooking a steak, flipping it every 15 seconds, just as I've shown you. As soon as that meat starts heating up, the proteins start contracting, and they force the water out of the cells in the meat. Now, this meat has not been rested. It's piping hot, so the fibres are still contracting and forcing out the juices. If you product cut into it now, you'll lose all that juiciness. Watch what happens when my hydraulic press, Otto, applies his weight onto this steak. Come on then, you ready?
Okay.
Now, this steak has been well and truly squashed, obliterated. And look at all the delicious juices that have come out. But what happens when a steak's been properly rested? This has been cooked exactly the same way.
So it's been rested for about 5 minutes.
So the fibres have cooled down, relaxed, and are keeping the juices in the steak. Can't hear a squelch. Now, if you look at this, okay, this is what I can get into this glass. Look at the difference between those two. This just shows you how important it is to rest your meat. That was all that came out of it. So it held on to its juices in spite of the mighty Otto. Now, back to my rested steak. You can see there is a beautiful crust, which will be juicy and full of flavour, and all of that moisture held inside the meat. Tender steak, just the most delicious, juicy, tender steak you can imagine. It's not just choosing the right cut of meat for your steak that matters. The flavour of all beef cuts depend on which part of the animal they come from. I've got a big old bull.
Yeah.
And my butcher mate Jack, who's going to help me show you how to tell the tender from the tough. Most people think that tender cuts like sirloin are generally the best, but the tough, muscular cuts can be really tasty. Any cut of meat that comes from the part of the animal that has had to do work needs longer cooking. Cows wander about and eat all day, so it's not surprising which are the muscular, tough cuts.
You will have top side, which is on the inside of the leg, and the silver side on this side of the leg, the cheek. Wonderful, wonderful piece of meat, which of course never stops chewing the cud.
Tough cuts like these can be the most delicious of all when cooked slow and low in stews, casseroles or roasts.
And then the magic of an oxtail, possibly the muscle that works the hardest, was wagging around, but what fantastic flavour.
That's one of my big favourites, and I'm going to be cooking with it later. Now for the tender parts that don't do much work. Like our steak, they should be cooked hot and fast.
That's your classic British sirloin steaks along there. Of course, the most tender of all, the fillet. Underneath that backbone, down there in the middle of the piece, like that.
I think a lot of people love fillet. Well, it's incredibly tender, but doesn't do any work,
It just kind of hangs there, and that's exactly why it's so tender.
There are so many different cuts of beef and millions of ways to cook them. I'm off to meet the protein-loving local rugby team to see how they cook their favourite hamburgers and see what they think of my tried and tested technique. One of the most important things about a burger is its texture. These boys aren't known for their light touch. But for a delicious tender burger, that's exactly what you need. Ty, so who's going first?
That'll be me, I think.
OK.
It's going to be a very British bacon and blue cheese burger. 100% chuck steak, blue cheese and bacon, butter there. So that's it, melt on the top at the end.
Well,
Shall I crack on?
Yeah, crack on. Mark hasn't added anything to bind his mince together, so he's using brute force to pummel it into shape. That is pretty impressive.
Knock yourself out, sir.
Oh, wow.
Gonna be hot yet.
Now, that's what I call a solid Jonah Lomu of a burger. The blue cheese and bacon does work really well with that. But by squashing the meat together so firmly, the burgers become really dense. Up next is Tom. He's adding a lot of ingredients to his mince.
I'm doing a Thai-inspired burger because I'm half Thai. Minced steak,
Yeah.
chilies, the zest and the juice of lime, galangal, and then kaffir limeys and garlic. And I'm using fish sauce. That's a cucumber, coriander, lime, and spring onion relish.
This is certainly the most unusual set of ingredients.
Yeah.
Adding loads of ingredients to your mince can increase the chance of it falling apart, but it looks like this one's going to hold strong.
They're not burnt. The word's caramelised.
I think that char-grilled crust might just have saved it.
The Thai-inspired burger.
It's a cucumber. It tastes pretty good, but if you didn't have a firm grip, it would be collapsing in your hand. And this is fabulous.
Thank you.
That'd be great with the curry, that.
And not great with a burger.
Next is Jamie with his Italian-inspired burger. He's using an egg to bind his mince.
So I'm actually putting the cheese and the diced cherry tomatoes in the centre.
A sandwich.
Yeah, a really yummy sandwich.
The egg will hold all this together, but he's making a big sacrifice on texture because egg can make the mince solid.
So there is my burger. Italian burger.
Cheese has stayed in there, melted.
The competition.
Oh, that's worked better than I thought it was going to. But I would get rid of the egg yolk.
Okay. It wasn't just yolk, it was white as well.
I was trying to give you the benefit of the doubt. The burgers tasted good, but I want to show them my fail-safe way to bind a burger and keep it soft and tender. Some sirloin. So, 625 grams of diced sirloin. Nice and fatty, so it's got loads of flavour. Now for my binding trick. Sprinkle it in salt and then left it for 4 hours. And the salt will bind the meat without adding any bread or eggs. Now I'm adding 1.2 kilograms of unsalted mince and pushing it all through a mincer so that it comes out in thick strands. Catch those strands and lie them in parallel lines, then wrap them in cling film to keep them together. So now this needs to go into the fridge just for a couple of hours so the salt can do its work and bind the meat together. This is the biggest trick for making a tender burger because the mince fibres go like this. Turn it that way, so the theory is when you bite into it, it just kind of falls apart. Biting down on the grain instead of across it makes the burgers melt in your mouth. Flip them every 15 to 20 seconds. I'm cooking it hot and fast for that brown crust, making sure the flames lick the meat. I pop some cheese on top, now the fun stuff. The magic ingredient is basically ketchup, mayonnaise and mustard.
Bloody good burger.
I hope I've convinced them to try ditching the eggs and the brute force. In part 2, we'll step up a gear with some beefy magic you can do at home. A suet pudding trick that'll change the way you make pies forever. And a bonfire on every plate with my smoking chili con carne. Each week I'm taking one ingredient and giving you some of my most exciting secrets and techniques. This week, it's that most British of meats, beef. We've mastered the basics. Next, some real theatre. But before I surprise some guests with my bonfire chili con carne,
Hands down, best chili I've ever had.
I'm going to do a twist on traditional steak and kidney pudding with a little trick which could change the way you make pies forever. For this, I'm using one of my favourite cuts, oxtail. It's a tough cut, full of connective tissue, but when cooked low and slow, it becomes so juicy and succulent. This is my take on a British classic, which is steak and kidney pudding. I think replacing the steak with the oxtail gives you a much richer, very glossy, deep, complex, absolutely delicious dish. Now, I developed this recipe to boost every single flavour, and you can use these techniques in any beef pie or stew. First trick, star anise. This is the magic ingredient. That aniseedy Chinese spice lifts beef to another level. Sweat 1 star anise with chopped onions and butter. Those two ingredients combined are really going to boost the meaty flavours from the oxtail. And I've added to that some finely sliced carrots and button mushroom. Take it off when it's golden. Then, my next flavour-boosting trick. That stuff at the bottom of the saucepan is full of deliciousness, so use it. Add some water and give those tasty bits a good scrape with a spoon. Then tip everything into the veg. Now, for the oxtail. I love this cut of meat. But not wanting to be too crude about it, oxtail, obviously, is quite near part of the animal that you wouldn't really want to eat. But what it does do is it gives... That's actually going to sound really horrible. What it does do is it gives you flavour. For a really deep, meaty flavour, you need to kickstart the old Maillard reaction. So get the oil smoking hot to brown the meat. Very important thing when browning meat, as much of a pain as it might seem, if you can't fit all the meat in one layer in the pan, you'll need to do it in more than one batch. Otherwise, the meat will sit on top of each other. The meat will sit on top of Basically, if you overcrowd the bloody pan, it doesn't work. The meat's now nicely browned all over. And it needs to come out of the pan so I can capture all of those delicious flavours at the bottom. But this time, to give a bit of an oomph, I'm adding 100 mils of brandy and 750 mils each of red wine, chicken stock and beef stock. Then, tomatoes, thyme and the bay leaf, and put back the oxtail and vegetables. Now, I said this needs to be cooked low and slow. In a conventional saucepan, it would take at least 4 hours, but I've discovered that we can speed that up with the power of pressure. A pressure cooker will cook it in just 2. Right, in here is my oxtail. I've turned this off and let it cool down. This is really important. I left the meat in the pan cooling down for 45 minutes. What a lot of people do when making stews, they'll take the meat out while it's still hot, because they can't basically be bothered to wait for it to cool down. That is a big mistake. As it cools down, all that steam and moisture is going to come out of the meat and you'll be left with really dry pieces of meat. Now to thicken the sauce. Oxtail is full of gelatin, which means it'll thicken all on its own. So strain it and reduce it on a high heat. Now back to the meat. After 2 hours of gentle pressure cooking, that meat will just fall off the bone. So now, to finish the filling, here I've got my picked oxtail, and in here I've got kidneys. I'm using veal kidneys, partly because I think they're delicious. Also, I'm going to keep it with the cow for this dish. Then, here's my reduced sauce. You can see it's starting to turn into jelly. That's fantastic. I'm going to add nearly all of this. I just want to keep a little bit back for the finishing touch, which I'll show you later. To keep with a beef theme, I'm encasing my oxtail stew in a suet pastry. You'll find the recipe for this on channel4.com/Heston. Simply fill these with the mixture. Take the lid and trim off the excess dough. I need to protect the lid with a piece of parchment paper and elastic band. Pop the puddings in a pan of water and steam for 35 minutes. When the pudding's done, carefully ease it out of the mould. Probably the only nice smell I can ever remember from school dinners. Now here's my big juicy pie technique. Remember, I saved some of the sauce. Could just spoon the sauce over the pudding. I don't want to do that. I want to inject it. This may look bonkers, but by injecting the pie right at the end, you can guarantee it's amazingly juicy and saucy. That is just so deeply satisfying. Makes you proud to be British. There are so many ingredients that work really well with beef. Got tarragon down here, which is the classic herb used in a béarnaise. Capers, great in a salad or steak tartare. Maybe surprisingly, even these, oysters, they add a saltiness and also boost the meaty characteristic of the dish. For me, if I was going to pick one ingredient that really allows beef to sing, it's the smell of a bonfire. So, for my next recipe, I'm going to use these, wood chips. Smoking wood chips will bring back memories of the bonfire and add a lovely smoky flavour to my chili con carne. Most of us recognise a chili con carne, and I think a lot of us think of it as really quite a simple dish. But with this recipe and a couple of great techniques, you can lift chili con carne into something really quite spectacular. First, the meat. I'm using standard mince made from a tough but tasty cut, and I'm frying it in a thin layer of olive oil. It's so often served as a grey and watery mass, but I'm going to show you how to make gorgeous mince every time. So, 450 grams of minced beef, which you need to seriously brown in batches. Don't overcrowd the pan. Your meat's just going to stew. When the mince is really dark brown, tip it into a bowl. Now for the chilli sauce. As in my oxtail pudding, I'm adding the amazing onion and star anise combo. Then 1 diced carrot, 1 green chilli, garlic, 1 tomato, and some tomato puree. Tomatoes have these compounds in them that, a bit like the onion and star anise mixture, massively boost meaty flavours. Pour in half a bottle of red wine and boil it until it's syrupy. Then return the brown mince to the pan and add 500 grams of beef stock. I want this mince to really break down so it becomes part of the sauce. So leave it to simmer with the lid off for a minimum of 2 hours, giving it the occasional stir. Next, the beans, 150 grams of dried kidney beans. Soak them in salted water overnight to stop them splitting. I learnt this the hard way. I got so obsessed about this that I even, embarrassingly, made a mark on every little blemish I could find on the bean and cooked them to see if they split where that mark was. Do you know what? They did. But do you know what's even worse? I didn't know what to do with those results. To pack my beans with flavour, I've cooked 500 grams of cherry tomatoes in a pressure cooker and strained the juice. I chucked in the vine for a tomatoey boost. If you go into a greenhouse full of tomatoes and that wonderful smell, it's not the tomatoes that's making that smell, it's these. They'll add an extra aromatic character to the dish. Cook the beans in the tomato sauce for 20 minutes. The mince and beans are ready, so you can now mix them together. And now I'm going to make something I think is really magical for this dish and a great technique for lots of stews. A flavoured butter. To make this, toast 1½ teaspoons each of ground cumin, smoked paprika and cayenne pepper. I've got some unsalted butter, just softened. I'm going to add to that some tomato ketchup, splash of Worcester sauce, touch of Marmite. So add to that the warm toasted spice oil and then stir. So the great thing with this is you can make more than you need. It will keep in the fridge for several weeks. Now just stir some of the butter into the chilli. That is a great chilli. The chilli's done, but I'm not stopping there. I'm serving it up like a real American cowboy chilli with its own little campfire. I've invited the local rugby guys for lunch and they've got no idea what I'm going to give them.
Pizza? I genuinely think it's going to be spag bol.
Heston, hello.
Hey, I just heard spag bol mentioned then.
Just speculating.
Right, what have we got here then? We've got cheese.
Are they fairy cakes?
Fairy cakes? They're cornbread muffins. And what about the wood chips and blowtorches? I always like to serve my dinners with the blowtorch.
That's good, I like to eat with the blowtorch.
Take some wood chips, just a handful, and put them in your bowls. And then you take your blowtorch. This dish, really, I'd eat with a bonfire.
But if it's bonfire nice, it's got to be chili con carne, doesn't it?
Exactly. The smell of the smoke gives a delicious smoky flavour to the chili.
Yes. Does smell like a bonfire, though.
Absolutely fantastic. Unbelievable.
Hands down the best chili I've ever had.
That's a result.
I've been a lot of chili in my time.
I'm taking 5 from that one. You can't take it back now.
I wouldn't even dream of it.
Next week, eggs, as you've never seen them before. A Scotch egg with a delicious runny yolk, my luscious lemon tart and some kitchen wizardry, bacon and egg ice cream.
And that's next Wednesday at 8. Teenage sweethearts wait to meet their new babies in a brand new One Born Every Minute tonight at 9. And before that, another new series, meet Tom and Henry, the fabulous Baker Brothers. Next.